We have analyzed your defensive capabilities as being unable to withstand us. If you defend yourselves, you will be punished.
As always, I want to thank my newest patron supporter, Donald Carlson. Thank you for helping me keep this going. And for those of you who hate that I take a little bit of time out of the beginning of my videos to thank my new patron supporters, let me say this real quick. Part 2 of this series was falsely DMCA'd by CBS, which means, of course, that any and all revenue for that video goes into the pockets of CBS. I considered taking the video down, re-editing it so that they couldn't file a claim, and then putting it back up. But frankly, with the rash of demonetization that I've been fighting recently, combined with the fact that most of you that want to see that video have already watched it, it's really not going to make that big a difference. That being said, Donald Carlson and the others who are listed in the description box below who choose to support this channel directly are making these videos possible. To them, the very least I can say is thank you. To my viewers in general, I thank you as well. While the ad revenue for this channel took a major hit, your viewership does help, of course. But to those who cannot stand the fact that I might take between 30 seconds to a couple of minutes to thank them, well, without them there would be no video. So yeah, deal with it. I want you to watch my videos, of course, but if you're seriously offended by me showing appreciation for those that make this whole thing possible, well, then you are offended way too easily. In fact, you should probably be thanking them as well. Unless, of course, you hate my videos, in which case I suppose you should be angry with them, but if you hate my videos, then, oh, why are you even here? This video is part 3 of my series on the Borg. In part 2, link below for the playlist of the series, I focused on the first appearance of the Borg in the Next Generation episode, Q Who. That episode, while overall not great, did have one overpowering effect. All of us nerds, starting on May 8th, 1989, began to ponder the idea of what would happen if the Borg actually showed up in Federation space. Well, on June 18th, 1990, we got our answer. And that answer was...
Mr. Worf. Fire.
Oh my God, we have to wait 3 months to find out what happened? That is so not fair. I can't possibly wait 3 months. What the f? Now, some of you may be wondering, based on the title of this video, why is this just a review of part 1 of Best of Both Worlds? After all, it's only one story, right? Well, the fact is, really, that I'm only doing part 1 in this video and part 2 in my next video for 2 reasons. First, the stories are actually quite different, even though part 2 is obviously a continuation of part 1. And second, well, the reviews are already too darn long, so do you really want me to do a review that's over an hour long? Yeah, I didn't think so. So let's get into it. Our story begins with the Enterprise D arriving at Jury 4 in response to a distress signal from a colony there known as New Providence. And let me just say for the record, while I've never been a fan of the design of the Enterprise D, they really improved the look of the ship just through lighting and cinematography in this episode. Everyone knows that this episode was really a turning point for the series, but not just in general storytelling, but the artistry of this episode was among the very best of the entire series. Anyway, the name of this colony, New Providence, I think is very interesting and a very good and subtle use of language. That name applies to almost every major facet of the episode in general. Like many words in the English language, Providence has multiple definitions, but the one I think best fits here is the timely preparation for future eventualities, something that the Federation failed to do in the case of being ready for the Borg. Riker failed to do in the consideration of his career, and even the Borg failed to do in part 2 when their weakness is exposed. Wow, you would think that the writers of this episode were actually trying to craft a well-thought-out story. Anyway, they prepare to beam down to the colony. Worf tells Riker that there's been no communication from the colony for 12 hours. In addition, sensors detect no signs of life. So they beam down into an area that looks like, well, a patch of dirt, some rocks, and vegetation. And Riker confirms with O'Brien that they are and I quote here, in the center of town. Look, I know I gave Worf a hard time in Q-Who over his inability to shoot a target which was locked on at point-blank range. But this makes Worf look like he is Hawkeye from the Avengers as far as his precision. As you can see, the away team is looking over a huge crater that used to be New Providence, which is a very cool-looking shot. Also, for those of us that love to geek out over this kind of thing, this is exactly what was described as far as what happened to the Romulan outposts in the episode Neutral Zone, as well as what was described in what happened to the alien planet in System J25 in Q-Who. That part was awesome. But the big problem here is that the middle of town would be here. Or to put it another way, here is a town of roughly the same size and shape of New Providence. According to what we saw, based on O'Brien, he said that this is the middle of town. The only real argument I've heard to defend this idea is that the away team landed in a place that really was in the middle of town, but all the buildings have been taken by the Borg. Fine, but let's keep in mind that this attack happened 12 hours ago, and vegetation like this does not grow in 12 hours. And in this shot, you can see that the away team is literally surrounded by vegetation. Further, this is not landscaped vegetation from some poor victim's lawn. This, from all appearances, is the natural wild vegetation of the area. So despite the fact that we can now see that the scanners of the Enterprise are unable to detect the fact that the colony was completely, utterly, and quite literally wiped off the face of the planet, except that they did do exactly that in both the episodes Neutral Zone and Q-Who, so they can't see a city that's been wiped out unless they're scanning an unknown planet or Romulan outposts? So, yeah. We get the credits, and after the credits, we get our title card showing the Enterprise flying in tight formation with the USS Melbourne. This is a beautiful shot, and normally I do not go out of my way to show a simple title card. But man, just look at this shot. I mean, not only does it make the Enterprise D not look laughable like it usually does, but they also made the Excelsior-class ship look better than we've ever seen it look up to this point. In fact, it would take 2 years for them to make Excelsior look as good as it does in this shot when they made Star Trek VI: The Undiscovered Country. Well, the Melbourne is here for 2 reasons. One, it came to transport Admiral Hansen and his attaché Commander Shelby from Starfleet Tactical to determine if this attack was indeed the Borg, since it matches the Borg MO. And the other reason? Well, Riker is up for promotion, and he's being offered the position of captain of the USS Melbourne. Okay, this brings up a common argument about Starfleet that I want to address head on. Well, as best as I can, anyway. There is a huge debate between various Star Trek fans that Starfleet is or is not the military of the Federation. Most of the fighting centers around lines of dialogue from Picard saying that they're not the military, or Kirk stating that they are, or the very design of starships. Are they meant for strategic operations or scientific research and exploration? But in this scenario with the USS Melbourne's 2 missions, well, you get a pretty compelling argument here. First, let's talk about Admiral Hansen and Shelby. The opening log entry by Picard says that they are from Starfleet Tactical. Put tactical in Google. Go ahead, all your anti-military guys, I dare you. Because tactical literally means relating to or constituting actions carefully planned to gain specific military ends. Yes, military ends. If Starfleet has an entire division devoted to tactical planning, there is no question. Starfleet is the military. However, Riker is being offered a promotion, and apparently he can accept it and become captain of the Melbourne, or he can decline it and remain a commander and first officer of the Enterprise. So Starfleet literally asks people to take duty stations. In fact, Hansen specifically mentions that this is the 3rd time that they have offered the captain's chair to Riker, but he refused to sit down. In the real world, while I cannot speak for the military of other nations, in the United States, a soldier, sailor, airman, or marine is not offered a position that they can then accept or decline. They are given orders, assigning them to a specific duty post for a specific period of time. If you are a high-ranking officer in the Navy, you could be assigned command of a ship, but it is not the private sector where you can apply for, then accept or decline a position. As an officer in the military, you are an asset that is put where you may be useful, period. Now, there are, of course, instances where you can request a transfer to a specific post, and that request may or may not be approved. However, it is still not your choice. You can only let them know what your choice would be, and if it is in the powers that be discretion, they can give you what you want. So, Starfleet is the military because clearly there is no other agency that defends the Federation from outside threats. But it's no wonder it's such an inept one. This progressive utopian future has people only serving where and when they want. So in essence, created an ineffective, lazy, spoiled military class that could likely not win a war with the Packlids, let alone the Borg. Admiral Hansen fills in Picard that Shelby is going to attempt to confirm that the attack on the colony was indeed the Borg, and despite the fact that they've had over a year and they've thrown every resource they have into this, the Federation is not ready for a direct confrontation with the Borg. Yeah. This is top priority. Let me explain for just a moment how this would go down in the real world. After the confrontation at System J25, Starfleet would have recalled the Enterprise to Starfleet Command, where they would do extensive debriefings with every officer, crew member, and civilian on board. They would finally reassign most of the crew to other duties, but create a task force led by Picard, Riker, Data, Worf, and Guinan. Yes, Guinan. You know, the only person who actually had prior knowledge of the Borg. Their mission, this task force that is, would be to develop offensive and defensive systems in order to counter the Borg threat. The Enterprise itself would be used as a home base for this task force since it already has the research labs needed for much of the work, and the damaged sections of the hull combined with the sensor logs could provide valuable information. The Enterprise would be refitted with all the improvements deemed necessary to create a ship capable of engaging the Borg. Yeah, that's what would happen if Starfleet was run by people who were not idiots. Instead, Guinan continues to be a bartender. Picard, Riker, Data, and Worf would just turn in their reports, and Starfleet will just kind of say, okay, so who wants to be an expert on these guys? And Shelby raises her hand because she has ambition, and now she is the official expert on the Borg. Now, you might be thinking, oh, great, here goes Anti-Trekker and another rant about women. But no, I don't hate the idea of Commander Shelby as a character, but making her the, quote, expert on the Borg when she is literally surrounded by people who have more experience than her with the Borg is just stupid. The Admiral explains that they thought they would have much more time before the Borg shows up since the encounter with J25 was over 7,000 light years away. Okay, but then here's the deal. Earlier in that same episode, they mentioned that it has been over a year since the prior encounter. And, of course, it's been 13 months since the Q-Who episode actually aired. Okay, so let's say it has been 13 months. Geordi says that the new weapon designs that Shelby mentions later could not possibly be ready inside of 18 months, and Shelby says that they have been projecting 24 months. So basically, Starfleet was already projecting its own demise, since 13 months plus the 24 months it would take to build any of these weapons is 3 years and 1 month, which, by the way, is 6 months longer than it would take the Enterprise to go back from System J25 under normal warp power. So even if the Borg had standard warp drive, no more advanced than the Federation would still be facing the exact same situation because they chose to run their non-military military like a liberal commune where everybody just gets to do whatever they want and we'll all just hope that everything is just fine. So, Shelby figures out that it is indeed the Borg. Hansen goes back to Starfleet to let them know that they are all boned. And Riker and Shelby fight because she wants his job as first officer. And she heard that he was going to accept the command of the Melbourne. Wait, what? So, she's running the Borg task force at Starfleet Command and has half the admirals tripping over themselves because either they're impressed with her work or they just think she's hot. No, I'm not making that up. Admiral Hansen himself, in one of the most chauvinistic moments in all of Star Trek, tells Picard how he wanted to dock in her spaceport. And yet, the enlightened liberal Picard did not object to his sexist comments. Whatever. Anyway, Shelby is the superstar of the Federation, yet she wants to be the first officer of the Enterprise. Really? Because if she got this Borg thing taken care of, she could choose any command she wanted. Riker wrestles with his own personal demons as to why he's turning down commands, and we get to see that Wesley is still an idiot. After all, Shelby explains that a Borg cube could still function effectively in combat with 78% of it destroyed, and Wesley chimes in with, and our best shot barely scratched the surface. Did he forget about the 3 huge holes they blasted into the cube? Whatever. Which, don't get me wrong, some of this stuff is great, but honestly, it's just padding until we finally get the moment we have been waiting for.
Mr. Worf, dispatch a subspace message to Admiral Hansen. We have engaged the Borg.
Now, when I say padding, keep in mind that I didn't mean the word as an insult. A mattress without padding would be very uncomfortable, and an episode without padding would feel too rushed and sometimes just pointless. Padding is what makes a good series work, but too much of it can also ruin an otherwise great episode. The funny thing is that in this episode it feels like there's a lot more story taking place than in the first part of Q Who. In Q Who, we get Q having a weird relationship with Guinan of some kind that's never really explained, and Q trying to join the crew. Then he gets mad at Picard because they say no, and he sends the Enterprise across the galaxy to meet the Borg. And that's really about it. We finally get to see the Borg cube in Q Who after a painful 18 minutes and 58 seconds. Now compare that to this episode that introduces us to Admiral Hansen and Commander Shelby. Riker and Shelby build up a convincing rivalry. Riker deals with a personal crisis, and they figure out that the Borg have indeed invaded Federation space. Then we get our first glimpse of a Borg cube after an intense buildup of 18 minutes and 13 seconds, exactly 45 seconds less than Q Who. So they're roughly the same amount of setup time, but one feels like it's dragging on forever and the other feels like a brisk-paced, intense ramp-up. I just wanted you to know this because, well, that is the power of writing. So the Borg show up, they ask for Picard by name, and deliver the ominous message.
I'm Captain Jean-Luc Picard.
Jean-Luc Picard, Captain of the Starship Enterprise, Registry NCC-1701D. You will lower your shields and prepare to transport yourself aboard our vessel. If you do not cooperate, we will destroy your ship.
Now, like in Regeneration, I'm okay with inconsistency as long as it's written into the story. In Regeneration, Phlox took longer to assimilate because of his immune system. And here, it seems that the Borg have completely changed their priorities. In fact, that is almost exactly what is actually said in the episode.
What the hell do they want with you?
I thought they weren't interested in human life forms, only our technology.
The priorities seem to have changed.
I'm also okay with the fact that they don't answer this question immediately, rather they wait until later when it flows naturally from the story. So the Borg attempt to lock on with their tractor beam, but the rotating shield frequencies seem to help for a few seconds, and then the Borg adapt and lock on. The shields are down, so the Enterprise, holy crap! Well, why didn't they do this in System J25? Seriously. I mean, look at all these weapons firing simultaneously. If we think about the amount of damage that a single phaser bank did to the Borg cube in J25, this would have decimated the Borg cube if it was not prepared for it. But herein lays a problem. In this episode, it appears that the Enterprise is about the same distance from the Borg as they were in their confrontation in Q Who. However, in Q Who, later on when the Enterprise is running away and has substantially more space between them and the Borg, Data points out that with the shields down, a photon torpedo detonation could likely destroy the Enterprise. In this shot, we see at least 3 torpedoes launched from the cube. And now, based on Worf's marksmanship from Q Who, it's not beyond reason that he could have missed with all 3 torpedoes, but even that would seem unlikely. Anyway, unlike apparently every other time the Borg will ever appear, the Borg remembered Federation weapons, and so all this does 0 damage, but those photon torpedoes should have destroyed the Enterprise, let's be real. Anyway, so the Borg begin cutting into the Enterprise with their laser, and things do not look good. Shelby then gets the idea to have Data randomly change phaser frequencies, constantly changing them, not, as she says, give them time to adapt. Well, this works. The Borg tractor beam is cut, and the Enterprise speeds off with the Borg in pursuit. They happen across the set for Star Trek II, The Wrath of Khan, and thinking about how great it worked out for Kirk, Picard enters the nebula. Unlike Khan, unfortunately, the Borg cannot be goaded into acting irrationally, so they simply decide to wait outside the nebula until the Enterprise comes out. After all, there's only one way in or out of a nebula, right? So Shelby, Geordi, Data, and Wesley fill in Riker on what may be a weakness in the Borg. That is, when the phasers were set to a high frequency, not only did they cut the tractor beam, but it caused a brief power drop throughout the cube. So they come up with a plan to modify the main deflector to emit a pulse of energy at that frequency. It would harness the full potential of the warp drive, so it would effectively one-shot the cube. Shelby also pisses off Riker some more by insisting that her other plan of separating the saucer section to give the cube 2 targets to attack should be brought to Picard, even though Riker shoots down the idea. She goes over his head and goes directly to Picard. Picard, being the diplomat that he is, tells Shelby that Riker is right, but also tells Riker that he should consider Shelby's plan as a fallback position in case things get bad. Riker and Shelby have words in the turbo lift, and I have to say, most of what I really like in Star Trek The Next Generation revolves around Picard, but this episode is all about Riker, and it's compelling, interesting, thrilling. In short, this is one of the best episodes of The Next Generation, or even all of Trek, and it's a Riker episode. This is Riker's best episode by far. His relationship with Shelby is him looking at himself from a few years ago, and he does not like what he sees. He's torn by his love of the Enterprise and his ambition, and he seems to have forgotten about that ambition, but he sees that it's alive and well in Shelby. Picard gives one of his most somber log entries ever, admitting that the Borg may well be unbeatable. Where did that come from? I mean, so Picard and Guinan talk, and frankly, I can't remember what they were talking about because I can't stop wondering if this guy's related to the Kardashians. Well, the Borg are tired of waiting. Plus, they want to see if that one ensign really has a booty worthy of assimilation. Get it? Anyway. So they start shooting lightning at the nebula in order to force the Enterprise out. But shooting lightning doesn't sound sciencey enough, so Riker says, and I'm quoting him here, that they are using some kind of magnetometric guided charges. I'm not going to even touch that one. So the Enterprise runs, and wow, this is a really nice looking shot. But you do know I was only kidding earlier when I said there's only one way in or out of a nebula, right? So we go straight from the best shot of this episode with the Enterprise running from the cube with the nebula as a backdrop to the worst shot of this episode, looking up Riker's nose with Picard and Worf as a backdrop. Okay, why do I hate this shot? Because in an effort to save money, and don't get me wrong, I understand this is necessary on a television budget from time to time, but in this effort, this shot is all we get to see as the Borg attempt to lock onto the Enterprise with their tractor beam. The Enterprise fires all weapons at the cube takes down the Enterprise's shields and locks on. All this while we look up Riker's nose. Seriously, go back and watch it. For how awesome most of this episode is, this shot is embarrassing. While they literally just tell you about all this exciting stuff that is happening, but don't bother to show you any of it. Then the Borg beam onto the bridge, and you know, I don't know why they waited until the shields were down since they didn't in Q-Who. Perhaps it's just because they changed the shield frequency, and we'll just assume that at least that worked. Anyway, in an uncharacteristically logical move, Worf immediately shoots the Borg dead, because the Borg apparently forgot that they have force fields that can block phasers. After the Borg dies, the rest of the collective remember that they can indeed just put up a force field, so the second one beams in and does exactly that. Riker and Worf get upset that they can't shoot this drone and attack hand-to-hand, and the Borg drone tosses Jonathan Frakes' and Michael Dorn's stunt doubles aside with ease. Alas, the whole thing was just a diversion, as Lady Borg abducts Picard while Riker and Worf are down. The Borg beam back to the cube along with Picard, and the dead Borg evaporates for reasons? I mean, really, what? There's no reason for this Borg to vanish. In Q-Who, we see another Borg remove parts of the Borg that apparently triggers self-destruction. And in part 2 of this episode, which I'll be reviewing in my next video, they even point out that we see the Borg remove parts which causes them to disintegrate. So what gives? Whatever. So the cube takes off and the Enterprise gives chase. Meanwhile, on the cube, Picard is brought before the collective, I guess, and we find out why the Borg are no longer just interested in technology. And also, for the first time ever, we hear their catchphrase.
Captain Jean-Luc Picard, you lead the strongest ship of the Federation fleet. You speak for your people.
I have nothing to say to you, and I will resist you with my last ounce of strength.
Strength is irrelevant. Resistance is futile. We wish to improve ourselves. We will add your biological and technological distinctiveness to our own. Your culture will adapt to service ours.
Impossible. My culture is based on freedom and self-determination.
Freedom is irrelevant. Self-determination is irrelevant. You must comply.
We would rather die.
Death is irrelevant. Your archaic cultures are authority-driven. To facilitate our introduction into your societies, it has been decided that a human voice will speak for us in all communications. You have been chosen to be that voice.
from what we see here, I'm okay with the change in the Borg from Q-Who. Now, don't get me wrong, I still prefer the way the Borg were in Q-Who, but at least this change feels like a natural progression of events as opposed to a retcon. From this conversation, it appears that the Borg have decided to begin assimilating others to improve themselves. Further, in order to make the transition easier, they would choose a representative to speak for them, and Picard has been chosen to be that voice. Now, of course, unfortunately, all of this will be contradicted later, but for now at least, it works and is consistent with everything we've seen of the Borg so far. While the Enterprise is ready to fire its super mega Death Star beam of death at the Borg, but they need to get the Borg ship to drop out of warp in order for them to fire, since it will require the full power of the warp drive to use their weapon. Further, Picard is still on board the Borg ship, so Worf, Shelby, Data, and Dr. Crusher decide to go to the Borg ship, and before they go over there, Data points out that the Borg did not attack them in Q-Who because they did not consider them a threat. First of all, no, they didn't know that. In fact, Riker said in Q-Who that either they don't see us or they don't see us as a threat. There's a big difference between that and just coming up with the conclusion that they didn't see them as a threat. I actually tend to think that it's the opposite, that they just didn't see them, that they were like bacteria inside a body of a spaceship. And the Borg didn't just not react because they didn't consider them a threat. They didn't react in any way, shape, or form to the away team. But unfortunately, now all that's different. So from this point forward, the Borg are officially stupid, as they apparently have no problem with people trespassing as long as they don't start breaking their stuff. They send the away team to get the Borg to slow to impulse, which they do by blowing up some power nodes, and to rescue Picard, and they find this. This moment, which of course I use in my opening credits, is the single scariest moment in all of Trek. The idea that in the face of the Borg, resistance truly is futile. Even a great mind like Picard has zero chance of holding on to his individuality. The Borg are inevitable. The away team beam back to the Enterprise, and Riker's story comes to its completion. Picard tried to push him, but he would not budge. Shelby tried to challenge him, and he would not be moved. Now, Riker gives the order.
Mr. Worf, fire.
And we have to wait 3 months to find out what happened. Well, I had to wait 3 months to find out what happened. You, of course, will, well, since this was years ago, you can watch the second part immediately and say, gee, that wasn't such a great cliffhanger, but shut up. This cliffhanger, for those of us that were around back then, was extremely painful. We genuinely did not know Picard was going to come back. We didn't know if Riker was going to be the new captain for the rest of the series. It was a very difficult summer, to say the least. Bottom line, this episode is the single best episode of Star Trek The Next Generation for me, and the second best appearance of the Borg, behind only Q-Who. Now, like I said before, I like the Borg better in Q-Who. I don't think the Q-Who was a better episode. But this episode is darn near perfect. Yes, it has some nitpick flaws, which I made a big deal out of. It has some minor plot holes, which I made a big deal out of. And the one general annoyance I have is that Shelby is the expert on the Borg. Personally, I think it would have been better written and make more sense if she was just an expert on weapons and was trying to help the Enterprise get ready for possible confrontation with the Borg. But all those flaws are so minor in comparison with the story as a whole. The incredible atmosphere of this episode, the sheer terror of the Borg is presented here. I have no choice but to give Best of Both Worlds a 10 out of 10. And well, it's all downhill from here. Well, we'll see you next time with Best of Both Worlds, Part 2.
We are the Borg. Resistance is futile. You will lower your shields and click on the like button and leave a comment for the anti-trekker. If you have not before, you will hit the subscribe button and the notifications icon so that you can hear more from the anti-trekker. If you have suggestions on how to improve this channel, you will leave a comment in the comment section below. If you appreciate the work put into these videos, you will go to https://www.patreon.com/Michael J. Crawford, link below, and support this channel. Excuses are irrelevant. You will comply.